Hello and welcome back to the third episode. Now this time we are going to look at the first estate. Not the first one, the crown. The first estate is the nobility, but we are looking at the crown itself as part of the estate system. And I'm going to explain to you what you as the king of this country need to manage, to look out for, and what you want to do over the course of this game and as a mod to advance your crown and your realm and everything, including your population in it. Now, the bureaucracy is exactly what you think if you hear the term bureaucracy. It's the state-organized management of your realm, which of course in this time frame, 1356, is not really well developed yet. For example, our state here has only a reach of 10% on average in these provinces we own. We also have a corruption of 48% within these provinces. It's different than the state corruption we have over here. It means that every province in here is roughly 48% corrupted in itself, which then is getting calculated into the state corruption, which is going up currently because we have differences between these corruption values, but also is depending on how willing your other estates are to work with your state. If you, for example, annoy your nobility, which is the most powerful estate currently, your corruption overall will go up because they will not pay taxes, they will cheat wherever they can, and they will really try to avoid you as their king and do everything to stop you, basically. So you want to have a compliant nobility for which you need loyalties. So basically the loyalties, which we are going to dive into in the next episode, are depending on how corrupt your empire is and what you can do about it. The loyalties of the bureaucracy are also existing here, so basically 51% of the loyalty is fine with the state as is currently. We also see here a set of icons which represent reforms and developments within your state. I'm going to switch the song here. So basically we have estate tax farming present, which means we can tax our population to a certain degree, and we can see efficiencies here. So for example, the base tax efficiency is 10% plus 10% of the state reach, so basically 1% additional from our state reach. And we can reform this over time to get this better. We can interact with our state here by, for example, going into direct the bureaucracy, where we can, for example, expand our bureaucracy this way. I definitely recommend not doing this at start. So you don't want to bureaucratize your state immediately unless you really know what you are doing or if you really want to push for it. But there are other ways that you maybe want to manage things first. Now, what you also can do up here is interact with your state itself. You can, for example, look at stability values, at your incomes, for example, where do you get your money from, and your corruption, where does it come from, for example. Here we can see that our corruption comes mostly from the nobles, which are not happy enough, so they produce 14% of our corruption currently. And so on. You can go through this and check out different things. For example, our share of land, so that's crown-owned properties. We own 4% and 10% of all forestry and farmlands, but also some mines and fisheries. While, for example, of the urban population and the urban infrastructure, we own nothing. What you also can do here is, for example, later on, you can reform your administration, which means you can push for better taxation laws. You can improve the incomes of your administrators in your realm, for which you need higher state reaches, for example, which reduce your corruption in your state overall. Because if you, for example, would increase your state reach continuously without being a modern state, your administrators would just do what they want and enrich themselves, basically making them nobles themselves. So the starting setup of every country is basically that they are more or less driven by the nobility, unless you play, for example, a horde here. or something very specific like a theocracy in Germany, for example, where you play like as a monastic state. Most of the states you can start with are very, very nobility driven. And you can also check out the national military here, which is basically telling you where your stuff is coming from. So most of our army is coming from levies here, which is basically coming from our nobility, and some national army, so some others which we can raise independently from the nobility, which we can reform over time as well. So for example, this time frame from 1356 to 1856 saw, of course, a shift from feudal levies, which were provided by the nobility, to a state recruitment up to, for example, into the Napoleon in this era, where you basically saw state recruitment, conscription, and similar things which are popping up over time, where the nobility is driven out of this business, basically. What you now need to do as a state is basically manage your estates, make them happy, manage them, get the money and military out of them, what you need for your conquests and your development, and meanwhile try to reform your realm into a more modern society, whatever you want to make it look like. So it could be a very clergy-driven state if you really want to do this in this direction. You can empower the clergy to dominate your realm. You can make also the nobility stronger. You can make it weaker. You can also give more powers to the burghers and therefore become more like a trade republic if you want to. But basically, that's the main drive here. There are some other aspects here, like you always want to manage your legitimacy, of course. You can look into government reforms, which have a certain degree of influence, like you are a birthright monarchy right now, which means that you have royal marriages, for example. But you also have a certain internal structure reform, which you want to manage here. You have a certain kind of centralization, which you want to manage. So currently we are completely decentralized. And also you have some kind of where does your military come from. We are completely localized currently because we are feudalized more or less, basically. Now, as one last thing, we are going to let the mod run for 2 seconds here, or 2 minutes more or less, just to show you what happens in the first 2 months. It's because there will be a lot of events happening. For example, you get an event for the Catholic faith. If you play something else, you get an event for the other faiths, which are just telling you some basic information, or you can get more information if you want to. But the most important one is the event which just popped up, which is the tax code. You will invest a certain amount of your powers here, administrative, diplomatic, or militarily, to extract taxation from your state. Basically, we are going to always keep it here on delegate taxes, which is done everything in automatic fashion each year, which will lead to taxes applying to your provinces. There's one of the first events. I'm going to explain this one in a second. So we are taxing our provinces as we see it best fit. So it's done automatically in the background. You can interact with it. I'm going to show that in a second. And you also get an event for the investment manager, which is basically taking some cash out of your treasury here and invests it automatically in your provinces to keep growing your farmlands, for example, keep growing your populations and everything. If you are new to it, for example, set it to something like 25%, add your provinces to it, and set it to every 3 years, and set it to notify me when it happens. This way, you will get a notification what the background AI has done in your realm. Where does it see a profit? Where does it want to maybe expand your populations into more farmland? And you will get therefore a better feeling of the economy, which I will explain in a later episode. You also get an event for the Dia Gracia religious menu, which is basically handling all the religious stuff. You can, for example, set up the courier information, which is the papacy information, so that you get notification about cardinals and elections and everything that's going on in the papacy here, which is, in this case, next door, so you definitely should be interested. But for example, if you play Sweden and you want to go Protestant anyway, So maybe you don't really care about the papacy in the first place, because you will never reach it and you are way too far away for it to matter anyway. So you maybe click it away because you don't care. And basically that's the starting point of the mod here. What I want to say is that every year you have a calculation on the 1st of January and 1st of February, which recalculates a lot of things like incomes, corruptions, loyalties, and everything. So some changes will happen over the course of 1 year in the things you do. So for example, effects of reforms that you do, effects of interactions you do might only show up after a year. Another system just popped up, which is of course also something you want to care about, is that there is a new plague just starting in South Brabant, which is here in the Netherlands. And that's something you are going to see multiple times in your run, because diseases are a very common thing and might have impacts on your realm. So for example, we can see here that there is a new bubonic plague which will spread from this province here outwards and therefore kill your population to a certain degree, which is something you don't want to happen, but you can't avoid it. So you really want to check out and keep your population healthy and happy and rich enough so that they are not hungry and therefore attract disease. And with that, I'm going to switch into the next episode. So leave a like, and in the next episode we are going to check out the first estate, which is the clergy.